As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a very important returning guest tonight, Mike Rivero, founder of WhatReallyHappened.com. A great alternative source to the mainstream media, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers once again. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
We've refreshingly been enjoying your radio show and your online streaming versions of that you post as well, so we can pick them up even if we miss the live ones. And you routinely deal with topics from a very fresh and I would say non-mainstream point of view that really cuts through a lot of the contradictions and the hypocrisy and that sort of thing. It really calls the powers that be out on what's really going on. We just and by the way, you have the distinguished one of the websites probably that's being attacked frequently, you mentioned, is cyber attacks. And I don't know, are you officially on the fake news list or not at this point?
Actually, yes. When Washington Post came out with their list of websites that were arms of Russian propaganda, I was very proud and delighted that my website was included there as well. I even made up a coffee cup with a logo on it for people who are sharing in our joy. Proud member of the Washington Post's arm of Russian propaganda list. And at this point, though, I see 2017 as the year of the rise of the independent media. And so I think it's time to start changing our terminology. Alternative media seems to have kind of a negative connotation. I prefer to use the phrase independent media. And I no longer refer to the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes and all these TV news networks as the mainstream media, because the reality is the large portion of the audience has now come on over to the online news sources.
It's
so
true.
We refer to them as the corporate media, and they are very clearly in the process of self-destructing. And it is really rather remarkable, after all these years I've been working on this website and the radio show, to see it suddenly start to change this dramatically. And but again, it is a fight. The corporate media sees itself as literally fighting for its survival, and they're trying to find some way that they can wreck the independent media or get the government to ban them. But with Donald Trump in the White House, that is not going to happen. Donald Trump understands clearly the corporate media was his enemy during the campaign last year. Trump understands the independent media had his back, correcting all the fake news that was being put out about Donald Trump. And that is why there have been some significant changes in the White House press corps. During the first press conference, they didn't give the first question to AP, which is sort of traditional. They went to the back of the room and they started taking questions from the journalists from some of the lesser corporate media newspapers, just completely ignored CNN. Trump has come on out and said he doesn't watch CNN because he doesn't watch fake news. And as of today, apparently, there is now a ban on anybody in the administration being interviewed on CNN. So he's just blacklisted them.
You mentioned a couple things I have to jump in on. One is we actually heard today that Trump acknowledged the corporate media is the opposition party. You know, he doesn't just have to deal with the Democratic Party, he's got to deal with the whole media as the opposition to him in trying to move forward with any of the agenda items that he's trying to accomplish. And secondly, when you mentioned earlier about the smear list, the blackball list of so-called Russian-influenced independent media, so if we could zero in a little bit on that topic of foreign interference in the affairs of our country, it was with some indignance that Obama was saying right after the Trump election that it was just unthinkable that Russia could have been doing any activities that would have affected, influenced in any way the U.S. elections. And yet, in your podcast this week, you went on just a litany of misleading and disruptive involvement and intrusion that were sponsored by George Soros, a Hungarian-American immigrant who has been accused of just a wide range of interventions from putting pressures on currencies to governments to fomenting chaos and riots and making these apparently grassroots demonstrations, which turn out to be sponsored by a mastermind and not at all grassroots. Can you kind of recap for us what you consider the high points of the George Soros legacy of, non-native or national, not grassroots intervention in our affairs of our country?
Well, basically what you're looking at is George Soros is playing the color revolution game, which is you go on in with sponsored agent provocateurs, you kick up unrest, you manufacture protests, you try and drive the legitimately elected government out of power in order to replace them with a puppet. And it's not just George Soros that's doing this. The CIA has been doing it since the end of World War II. They've tried for these covert regime changes in more than 50 countries. They succeed about half the time. Some of the successes we know about are Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973. Sometimes they don't go very well. Iran in 2009 was a failure. At this point, I think we have to look at Ukraine as hardly being a glowing success there. But Soros is very much exposed in more recent efforts, including the Maidan over in Kiev. And it's point where the world is waking up to just his nefarious machinations. And at this point, George Soros and to a lesser extent Bill Gates have become the strongest arguments for socialism I've seen, because they demonstrate what individuals with way too much money are capable of doing that causes a great deal of harm. Now, Soros and other billionaires, again, Bill Gates, seem to have this idea that being a billionaire gives them some kind of a right to treat planet Earth and all of the human race like they're playthings and just play games and do what if. And obviously, ordinary people are not going to be happy with that, because nobody has elected George Soros, or for that matter, Bill Gates, to make world-changing decisions on our behalf. And so there's a bit of a pushback. Russia discovered that Soros's non-governmental organizations were trying to kick up a revolution in Russia. Russia has now banned Soros and all of his organizations. Hungary is doing the same. Macedonia is doing the same. Serbia is doing the same. We're hearing reports that all across Europe, there are movements to ban Soros and his non-governmental organizations because they have been encouraging and funding this influx of refugees into these European nations that have caused so much trouble. And all of this is being done by Soros because what his Open Society Foundation is really all about is bringing about the New World Order, one world government. And people are very much opposed to that. But Soros has been dreaming of this all of his life. He's spending most of his fortune trying to accomplish this. And he was so close with making this happen. Then the Brexit vote happened. Then Trump won the election. And the globalists are now in an absolute panic that their dream of a single golden throne for planet Earth is going to slip away from them. And this push for globalism and integration has triggered a backlash of nationalism and sovereignty. And we're seeing the globalists out there trying to scream that populism is bad. People shouldn't be thinking about their own country and trying to move forward. But they're running into a major roadblock because of the failure of the European Union, which was a stepping stone to the one world government. It's failed economically. Even the IMF is saying that the euro is dysfunctional because of all the out-of-control debt. And we're now seeing with the upcoming elections in Europe, those candidates who are anti-EU, who are saying it's time to return to separate nations, they're all leading in the polls, like Marine Le Pen. And so we're seeing out of this push for a global government, it's created a political climate conducive to a global revolution against all of these ultra-rich elites who want to have one world government with themselves, of course, in charge.
And how do you see domestically here civil unrest? You mentioned a number of things that George Soros is connected to that people thought, or you'd certainly would, if you went on the corporate media, you'd certainly believe that these are organic grassroots protests that have been happening over the last year. Can you
Soros was funding Black Lives Matter. Soros was funding the Women's March, which was actually an anti-Trump march. We're now finding out that Soros is behind the protests against Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. In fact, the instant Trump made the announcement, these protesters showed up at the Supreme Court with professionally printed signs with the correct name on them. So they had these things printed and ready to go. And it always tracks back to these non-governmental organizations, and they're recruiting people to lead these revolutions who are not very reputable. In fact, they just arrested the leader of the Portland anti-Trump march. It turns out he's a registered sex offender, and they just arrested him on some more charges of inappropriate sexual contact with children. And this is what's supposed to represent the American people standing up against Donald Trump. And you're seeing that they're having to recruit from some real losers to try and find people who are willing to carry their water against Trump. And the amount of sedition I am seeing, even in the corporate media, where we still have people who are out there writing about it's still not too late to get Trump kicked out and put Hillary in. And they're in violation of all kinds of laws. All of these people threatening to assassinate Trump, they're all committing crimes, and Trump needs to come down hard on them now and just stamp this out before it really gets going.
It's you didn't mention just now, but you did in your other podcast, is about the election recount funding and anti-immigration block protests at airports currently, all being tied back to funding from a single
They're all
mastermind.
tied back to various George Soros enterprises. He's got his Open Society Foundation, and then underneath that are a large number of these NGOs, which are used to kind of blur and obfuscate who's really calling the shots and who's really signing the paychecks. But because of the requirements for financial reports coming out of these nonprofit charitable organizations, which aren't actually all that charitable, it's possible to follow the money. And it always goes back to the Open Society Foundation and George Soros' desire to tear down all of the sovereign nations of the world in favor of his one world government.
And what do you interpret as the end goal of that?
Well, vanity and ego of having a one world government and having your particular derriere sitting on that golden throne of planet Earth. The other objective, though, is a little more mercantile, and that is to basically enslave all of the people of planet Earth to a single private central bank, which would enslave everybody to debt until the human race goes extinct. And they're very close to that already with all the individual private central banks. I think there are only 3 nations left on Earth that do not have these private central banks. And the problem with the private central bank, we've certainly seen it here in the United States of America. By design, they manufacture more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And the debt grows and grows and grows and grows until the system locks up. The real hard assets of the nation and its people wind up in the pockets of the bankers, and everybody is literally enslaved to the bankers by that awareness of indebtedness. But it's an artificial construct, because most, if not all of that debt is interest, meaning it's money that never existed in the first place. And I understand for commercial banking and depositor banking, pooling money together and loaning it out at interest is a valid part of commerce. But with a private central bank, it's essentially a legalized counterfeiting operation, because what they do when a private central bank comes into a country is they will take over management of the currency. And instead of having a public currency that works as a public utility, you have this private central bank creating money out of thin air and then lending it into circulation at interest. And the instant that starts, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists, and there's no way to reverse it. So it doesn't matter how hard the people work or how much they sacrifice, they can never get out of debt to that private central bank.
So we've been hearing about this, we've heard it called debt slavery or fiat slavery for several years. What is the realistic end game? How do you see this playing out? It seems like it ends badly in one of a couple different ways. What are the main ways that you see that playing out, and which do you think is most likely?
Well, throughout history, I mean, private central banking has been victimizing planet Earth for about 300 years. And it's made the Rothschilds so wealthy that their family fortune is 5 times the wealth of the world's 5 top billionaires. I'm sorry, 8 top billionaires put together. That's how rich they are. They're so rich, nobody ever mentions them in the lists of the world's richest people. They don't want everybody to know how much they've made off the people of planet Earth for nothing more than the privilege of using their ink and paper. The same reason the Federal Reserve is fighting an audit, tooth and nail. If the American people ever found out how much real wealth was siphoned out of their pockets and put into the pockets of these bankers for nothing more than ink and paper and numbers in a computer, they would definitely burn the place to the ground. Now, in the past, anytime a nation that was enslaved to a private central bank collapsed, the other nations enslaved to private central banks would step on in, pour in money, and restart the system and begin the scam all over again. Anytime a nation tried to break free from private central banking, the other nations enslaved to private central banks would declare war on it. This is what happened to Germany. In the 1930s, Germany was, under the Weimar Republic, was held prisoner by the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. When the Nazis came to power, they shut down that private central bank. They started a state central bank and issued a value-based currency. And it turned Germany's economy around so much it was being called the German miracle. In fact, Adolf Hitler was made Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938 for this amazing transformation of German economic might. They were building factories, they were making products, they were selling around the world. And of course, that was why you had people like Winston Churchill starting to say, we have to have another war to destroy Germany, because a nation that's enslaved to a private central bank can't compete with a nation that's operating with an honest money system. And it's always been that way. Now, in the current circumstance, there's been a major change, and it's called globalism. And even before the talk about dropping borders, the world's financial centers decided to link up. And it has a downside. This economic globalism is why the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud on Wall Street almost destroyed the banks in Europe, because they were all tangled up with each other. They'd trade derivatives. And you need to understand, national borders serve a very important function. They serve the same function for planet Earth that fireproof doors do in a building or watertight hatches do in a ship. They contain an accident so it doesn't threaten the whole system. But when you have all of the world's banks linked together without any kind of inhibition of currency and flowing across borders, then in effect you've blocked open the fire doors in the building, you've welded open the watertight hatches on the ship, and the first fire is going to destroy the entire building, the first leak will sink the entire ship, and the first economic failure will drag the whole system down. And that is what I think is going to happen. And it's probably going to start in Europe. Where the European Central Bank has basically made all of the banks of all of the independent member nations of the European Union a single entity. And they're desperately trying to move money around from the richest nations to the poorest nations to keep them all out of default. But it's operating, if you will, like a wooden boat that has 19 holes drilled in the bottom of it, but only 18 corks. And everything the ECB, or for that matter, the IMF, tries to do to rectify the situation really amounts to little more than yanking a cork out of one hole and pounding it into another hole in full view of the media cameras saying, I am working to solve the problem. But the water still comes on in, the debt continues to grow, the boat sinks, the European Union is headed for a collapse. And because of the derivatives entanglement with Wall Street, we're probably, the contagion will spread pretty much all the way around the globe.
Well, Mike, in the face of that, what prudent steps do you recommend that ordinary individuals do? I can guess the first one is keep your eyes open and your ears open and your mind open and seek out information not from the corporate media but from independent media. What's next?
Well, obviously that would be the first one. Obviously, you need to worry about wealth preservation. We know there's a big push now to try and ban cash to make you dependent on those little bank cards and to eliminate the possibility of a run on the banks should they start to fail. Because if there's no such thing as cash, how do you get your money out of the bank? All they can do is transfer it to someplace else. And coincident with that, we'll probably see a ban on personal ownership of investment metals. They've already had to start doing that over in India, and the place is in utter chaos over there. So it would be very wise to be buying silver and gold in small amounts that are not being recorded and hide them someplace where nobody knows about it. Don't tell your neighbors about, oh, I got all these gold coins, and have them available. And obviously, when this all starts to come apart, it's going to represent a once in 300-year opportunity for the people of planet Earth to stand up and say, no more private central banks. We demand an honest money system, a public currency that's managed as a public utility, not the wealth of the nation placed in private hands to make them richer than they already are. And the bankers are very much scared that people are waking up to the true nature of how banking operates and how it really is a tool of covert rulership, rule by compound interest, if you will. And it's really no more legitimate a system of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, rule by bank interest only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed into thinking this is the way the world is supposed to be. But it isn't. There are other ways to run a national economy, including the way the United States started, where the government created its own money, spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. It flowed through commerce without accruing interest, and then was taxed back at the same amount to balance the books and close the cycle. And that's a system that works for the nation, and it works for the people. But the private central bankers cannot stand the idea of any government or any people creating their own money. They dream of a world where everybody is dependent on their ink and paper notes and forced to borrow them at interest. Most people don't realize that King George III's Currency Act was the cause of the American Revolution. And that's where King George III ordered the colonies to stop creating their own money and conduct all commerce and pay all taxes in banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And in the space of just a few years, the American economy was destroyed by this, as the economy of any nation in servitude to a private central bank is destroyed. And that was really the cause of the American Revolution. But back in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was instituted, public schools were told not to teach about the Currency Act anymore, and the American Revolution was sort of recrafted into the Tea Party and Paul Revere's Ride and all the rest of it, out of fear that the smart students would stand up and say, wait a minute, we've got the same banking system today that King George III imposed on the colonies, which is we are forced to do all commerce with banknotes borrowed at interest from a private central bank.
Well, Mike, I think you've really hit the topics that we were hoping to address with you tonight. This certainly seems to have been launched since the Brexit late last year, the Trump election, and now the Trump inauguration, and a flurry of executive orders that have followed it. We seem to be just hurtling off the launch pad and into a very tumultuous 2017. Do you have any thoughts on what lies ahead in 2017 that we should watch for?
Well, I don't agree with everything that Trump is doing, but mostly I do. He is definitely showing that he is the boss and he's in charge, and he needs to do that because he's dealing with a huge amount of bureaucratic inertia, an obstructionist Congress, corporate media that is openly hostile to him, and a liberal establishment that still goes to sleep at night dreaming that they can somehow get Empress Hillary I into the White House. So Trump is keeping his campaign promises. The polls are showing that most Americans are fully on board with his pulling back this open border policy in order to protect us. The one area where he's vulnerable is the economy, because he wants to do all these infrastructure improvements and everything, but he doesn't have any money to work with in the federal budget. And, of course, taking on more debt is going to create its own problems. I would not be surprised to see Donald Trump do what John F. Kennedy did with Executive Order 11110 and order the Treasury to issue a new legal currency in the United States that would be used to fund his infrastructure developments at no interest. And Ellen Brown has already pointed out that if Trump were to do that, or if we were to use the Bank of North Dakota, which is a public bank, that the infrastructure projects could be done for half the cost. Because it's really that accumulating interest of the bankers that makes things so expensive. And for a lot of people, you ought to sit down and look at the price you paid for your house versus how much you paid the bank over the 30-year mortgage, and you will find out that the banks make more money off your house than the people who actually built it. And all they do was type a number into a computer that says you now have our royal blessing to buy a house.
And this means, do you think that we can certainly look to more changes from Trump and possibly even a new economic scheme by which to fund those infrastructure things without amassing more indebtedness to these private central banks?
Well, Trump knows as well as anybody else does that when you go up against the private central banks, you're fighting a terrible foe. But the reality is that our economy is in serious trouble, and we could be seeing a crash this year. Now, Donald Trump's got nothing to do with it. We know the corporate media is going to blame him for it the way they blamed Herbert Hoover for the Depression of the 1930s. But Herbert Hoover did not create the Depression of the 1930s. It was created for him. But I think if there's a downturn, Donald Trump may show his true strength by being willing to take some draconian steps to try and contain the damage and get the U.S. back on track. His predecessors would have just gone along and said, oh, woe was us, it's somebody else's fault. But Trump could issue a new U.S. currency. He could even move to take direct control of the Federal Reserve the way Putin took control of Russia's central bank, which is, by the way, the moment Russia went from being friend and partner to the top position on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Trump could actually do that. And the important thing, I think, for all of us to remember is that anybody who thinks getting Donald Trump into the White House was the end of it can all sit back. You're dreaming. Donald Trump, in order to bring about the changes we want, he's going to need our supports. We, the American people, are going to have to stand shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump and glare into the offices of the senators and representatives and remind them they are supposed to be working for us. Not for Israel, not for the pharmaceutical corporations, not for the military-industrial complex, and learn the lesson from 2016. Election rigging cannot save your job if there's a landslide move to pink slip you. And some of the members of Congress seem to be getting that. And but we need to make that very, very clear. The other thing that we're working on for the next 2 years, we've got to overhaul the election system. Now, Trump is on board. He's mounting an investigation into all the fraud that took place last year. The corporate media and the liberals are still out there saying, well, there was only a little fraud. It didn't change the outcome. But the Horn News did a search, and they discovered election fraud of one form or another took place in every one of the 50 states. So we need to get a truly honest election system back in place so that we, the American people, are once again in charge of our country.
Well, Mike Rivero, if people want to plug into more of this refreshing and independent angle that you are exposing us to, where can they find your work?
Well, the website is whatreallyhappened.com. We've been running that in one form or another for about 23 years. I have a daily talk radio show on the Republic Broadcasting Network. We're just coming up on our 10th anniversary for that as well.
Mike Rivero, founder and host of What Really Happened. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, thank you very much for having me again.